Why are so many employees leaving their jobs? There's been a lot of talk since the start of the pandemic about a great resignation or a great reassessment. People are giving it different names, but basically it speaks to the turmoil and the uncertainty or the lack of clarity around what's happening in the labor markets at the moment with regard to jobs and why there are so many open jobs and why people aren't, for example, going back to work after leaving the workforce at the height of COVID. There's, as we stand today, there's 10 million open jobs in the United States. Uh, there's also a lot of friction. So in the month of October, there's 100,000 workers who are striking. In August, 4.3 million U.S. workers quit their jobs. So 3% of the entire U.S. workforce left their position, whether to find a new position or just to leave the workforce completely. So we're seeing that there's a lot of unanswered questions for those of us who try to understand the labor markets, and trying to come up with solutions is difficult to do because there isn't any real indicator as to why this is happening across the board, across such a large swath of the working population. So what I wanted to do here was just pull together a few ideas, pull together a few reasons why we think that this is happening, why there are so many people quitting their jobs. I'd love to learn about what you think in the comment section below if you have ideas as to why people are leaving the workforce. But here are just some thoughts as I think about what is happening in the labor markets at the moment. So the first is that workers have unprecedented power. Labor dynamics are always a function of supply and demand, and for decades and decades, the power has been on the employer side. So there's been fewer jobs and more workers, and with that, you get a chance to lower wages and you're more competitive just as an organization because more people need to find jobs and you then have a larger pool of people to choose from. That's shifted dramatically with the supply chain disruptions, with just the fact that there are 10 million open jobs at the moment. You can see how the power shifts over to the employee side, and as soon as you become aware of something like that, if you do work in an organization where you don't feel a sense of loyalty to the organization or the mission, then it's very easy to become swayed and try and find another job where you can see if you can get a pay bump, for example, for the change in jobs. And that's not an unreasonable thing in this market with how desperate employers are to find talent. Granted, the reality is that, and there are articles that came out just in the last few days, and we've known this, from kind of anecdotal evidence and then research over time, but the pay raise that most people are getting for jumping, barring a few industries where you can get a significant jump. We looked at the creative industry just a few days ago, but the pay raise is only 4 to 5%, which is not anything more than you would usually get in the normal market, and I'm certain is a lot smaller than what a lot of people think you can actually do by changing jobs at the moment. So that dynamic there, where you've got labor and supply in such a strong imbalance, with the incentive of a small pay bump, is the first, I think, dynamic to be aware of when it comes to why this is happening, why there's been this great resignation. Because it's hard to think that people can resign, especially if you've got obligations, a family, a mortgage, rent to pay, that you can just leave the workforce completely and not have to go back. That's one of the big kind of dumbfounding questions, as we all think about the labor markets at the moment, which is, where did all these people go? And trying to identify a reason as to why individuals can leave the workforce and be able to afford all the obligations that they could afford before. That's one that's difficult to come around to. But it speaks to something that's underlying in the workforce. This is the largest job vacancy crisis in history, and so something shifted in the labor markets there, and I think we're all just trying to put our thumb on it to figure out what's going on. The second thing to think about is that this is, while the implications of the labor shortages have kind of applied across the board, across most industries, it's more dramatic in certain industries. Healthcare, for example, it's particularly dramatic. So 62% of hospitals are experiencing a vacancy rate of higher than 7.5%. So, you know, majority of hospitals in the U.S. are seeing a nursing and uh, a talent vacancy of nearly 10%. So that's stark, and it probably highlights certain employer brand dynamics within the hospital and healthcare industry. But this isn't unusual. I mean, I spoke to an individual that works, at a manufacturing shop a few weeks ago, and he was saying that they're operating at 70% of the capacity that they need, not just to make a profit, just to stay afloat. So they're working at, if they need 10 individuals to break even, they're working with 7 at the moment. So how sustainable is that over time? Again, there's probably a dynamic there where we're talking about an industry that has employer brand kind of issues, or there's a lack of maybe sexiness to that industry. Thinking of like tech and Amazon with their ambitious hiring. I read a report just the other day that Amazon's looking to hire another 500,000 individuals. And for all intents and purposes, they may see a shortage, or they may fall short of that target, but they're going to have a lot less issues attracting talent with, one, the industry that they're in, the brand equity that Amazon has, and then the employer brand that Amazon has. When you compare that brand to a manufacturing shop, for example, one is gonna win. The third thing, and it's an interesting new dynamic that I'm learning about, and I think it is interesting to think about, which is that millennials and Gen Z have been reported to appreciate or place more value on something called net freedom over net worth. And it's interesting, the idea that what we think about work and the meaning of work is shifting with such a large swath of the population. But that also could point to what's happening with quits. So net quits, for example, when people leave the workforce in the numbers that they do, maybe this is an indication that people are a little bit confused about what they want at the moment, and are maybe going to pursue their own things, maybe their own startups or their own ideas of what work should be. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, and then maybe in a few months we see kind of an onrush back into the workforce, when things, hopefully not, but when things go sour with their own ventures. I mean, there's certain dynamics around net freedom that are interesting to think about. There's also a big element there where I think a lot of that demographic doesn't have the obligations of an older generation. So maybe they don't have kids, or they don't have other individuals that they need to support. So you can live on a lower wage structure. But, I feel like those options come off the table as parents when you've got kids that need to go to school, or you need to feed your kids, and different dynamics, save for college, for example. So net freedom over net worth is one thing that you're going to start to see a lot more literature and media coverage about. It's an interesting to think about from a labor shortage standpoint, and that kind of leads into the fourth point, which is childcare, and the shortage of workers in childcare and the implications across the economy that has. So we mentioned just a second ago about parents. If there's a big shortage in the childcare industry, parents then can't leave their kids at facilities that look after children during the day. That affects their work, and you can start to see a dynamic there where things start to get a little bit difficult. Maybe one parent has to stay home and can't go to their job, or there's something, there are other dynamics at work there. But the shortage of workers in childcare has widespread consequences across the rest of the economy. So what we see there with unprecedented labor power, so that big shift in supply and demand in labor and jobs, the idea that this is more dramatic in certain industries based on their employer brand and the industry, net freedom over net worth, and childcare. I think we've got 4 points there that explain some percentage of what's happening with the Great Resignation or the Great Reassessment. Might not explain all of it, and once again, I'm curious to know what everybody thinks in the comments below. But I don't see this, if you think of those 4 implications there, this is going to be something that's going to take a minute to get out of. And maybe we never do, and there's a realignment of the actual economy and the dynamics around work and things. But four things to think about, just as we kind of try to understand what's happening with the Great Resignation. But it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next 12 months, especially as we go through the holiday season and we see traditional retailers that need seasonal or rely on seasonal workers to get through their fiscal years. So something about retail that maybe not everybody knows, but for most of the months of the year, typically retail loses money. They typically make all of their money in that kind of November, December time frame where they can capture a lot of holiday sales. It'll be interesting to see the dynamics around those companies, whether they're able to fill their pipelines and their org charts with as many people as they need going into the end of the year. And if they can't, what does that mean for those businesses? And then, as we kind of come out through the year, end of the year into the beginning of next year, what happens with the supply chain issues and what are the implications with labor again going forward? Whether, of course, there's even more friction as we go into the last couple months of the year, like we're seeing at organizations like Netflix and stuff. So very interesting time to be working in the space around work and labor. But yeah, something that's difficult to explain at the moment. Well, we'll see.